Get ready to step into a world where the unknown lurks in the shadows and the impossible becomes reality. Here, you will hear stories that defy logic, encounters with the unexplained, and mysteries that echo through time. Welcome, but be careful. Some stories are more than just tales. They are still alive. Edgar Allan Poe is, without a doubt, one of the central figures in the formation and consolidation of the horror genre in world literature. His work, marked by a dense atmosphere, the exploration of extreme psychological states, and the masterful use of symbols and images, transcends time, exerting a profound influence on writers and artists from various eras. This essay aims to analyze, in light of published essays and analyses, the fundamental elements that compose the writer's universe, highlighting his influences on horror literature and emphasizing the melancholic aspects that permeate his narrative. What follows is a reflection on Poe's biography, his literary style, the recurring themes, and the legacy that endures to this day. Edgar Allan Poe was born in 1809 in Boston and lived a life marked by losses, instability, and personal difficulties, elements that would come to be deeply reflected in his work. Poe's trajectory is characterized by tragic episodes, such as the premature death of his parents, the turbulent relationship with his adoptive family, and the loss of loved ones, especially women, who, in turn, symbolize the beauty and fragility of existence. This personal experience of pain and abandonment helped shape his worldview and imbued his narrative with an almost palpable melancholy. The historical context in which Poe lived also contributed to the consolidation of his writing. The cultural effervescence of Romanticism, coupled with a troubled social and political environment, led literature to explore themes such as existential anguish, death, and mystery. Poe, with his singular vision, captured this sensitivity and transformed it into a body of work that stands out for its originality and its ability to inspire readers to immerse themselves in a universe where the irrational and the macabre coexist side by side. Poe's writing is, above all, a synthesis between refined technique and intense emotional expression. His texts reveal an unparalleled mastery of language, where every word, every pause, and every symbol is meticulously chosen to create an atmosphere of tension and unease. One of Poe's great strengths is his construction of suspense. In works such as The Raven, The Fall of the House of Usher, and The Black Cat, the author employs narrative technique to lead the reader down paths where reality blends with the supernatural. The cadence of the verses, the precise choice of words, and the creation of gloomy settings turn the narrative environment into a character in itself. This ability to manipulate time and narrative space is one of the main reasons his work continues to influence contemporary writers. The symbols present in his work, black, decay, ruined houses, and the enigmatic figure of characters, act as markers of a fragmented reality, where the beautiful and the horrific meet in constant tension. Poe's symbolism transcends mere literary ornamentation. It is the vehicle through which the author communicates his internal conflicts and his perception of a world dominated by the inexorable passage of time and by the suffering inherent to human existence. Another striking aspect of Poe's writing is his sensitivity to the musicality of language. His poems in particular reveal a hypnotic rhythm that contributes to the creation of an atmosphere both oppressive and enchanting. The repetition of sounds, the careful selection of words that resonate in the reader's mind, and the cadence bordering on the incantatory transform the act of reading into an almost ritualistic experience, where each verse carries a powerful emotional charge. Upon dissecting Poe's work, becomes evident that certain recurring themes are fundamental to understanding his contribution to horror literature. Among these, psychological horror, the obsession with death, and the inescapable presence of melancholy stand out. Unlike many authors who resort to explicit horror and the grotesque, Poe employs terror in a subtle and introspective manner. He plunges into the depths of the human mind, exploring the darkest corners of the psyche where fear and madness intertwine. Works such as The Telltale Heart and The Cask of Amontillado demonstrate how guilt, paranoia, and self-annihilation can manifest so intensely that they transform the narrator into a prisoner of his own internal torments. This approach, which favors existential and psychological terror, is a legacy that has profoundly influenced later writers, paving the way for narratives that explore horror as an internal manifestation rather than an external one. Death is a constant presence in Poe's oeuvre, whether in the figure of the deceased lady that pervades Annabel Lee, or in the grim atmosphere of The Fall of the House of Usher. The fleeting nature of life and the inevitability of death are themes that often mingle with a sense of nostalgia and sorrow. For Poe, death is not merely an end, but a state of being that imbues existence with a tragic and paradoxically beautiful character. This duality between the pain of loss and the inherent beauty of farewell is what lends his work a melancholic and reflective tone, resonating with readers in search of answers to existential dilemmas. Another aspect that permeates Poe's narrative is the idea that human beings are composed of opposing forces. In many of his short stories and poems, there is a tension between reason and madness, between the ideal self and the dark self. This duality not only reveals the intrinsic contradictions of the human condition, but also suggests that horror is often closer to our inner selves than we imagine. The fragmentation of identity, evident in the narrative of The Oval Portrait and other tales, serves as a metaphor for the internal conflict that afflicts every individual, especially when confronted with their own mortality and the mysteries of existence. Poe's mark on the horror genre is indelible. His style and themes have influenced not only his contemporaries, but also future generations of writers, filmmakers, and artists. This influence can be observed in various aspects of popular culture and in the way horror is approached across different media. Many scholars point out that Poe was the pioneer of the modern horror tale. By combining a dense narrative with a unique creation of atmosphere, he laid the foundations for a genre that would go on to explore not only supernatural terror, but also the depths of psychological and existential horror. Authors such as H.P. Lovecraft, who would later create his own universe of cosmic horrors, and contemporary writers like Stephen King acknowledge Poe's direct influence on the way horror is narrated and perceived. This influence is reflected in the ability to transform fear into an almost tangible experience, in which the reader finds themselves immersed in a world where the unknown and the incomprehensible are central elements. Poe's work is frequently associated with Gothic Romanticism, a movement characterized by the exploration of extreme emotions and the depiction of decadent and mysterious settings. The Gothic aesthetic, with its ruins, gloomy castles, and atmospheres laden with symbolism, finds in Poe one of its most notable exponents. His meticulous descriptions of degraded environments, dark interiors, and decaying urban landscapes paved the way for a new form of literary expression where horror and beauty merge to create a unique narrative. This contribution was crucial for the development of the Gothic novel and for the subsequent emergence of subgenres dedicated to exploring the macabre and the inexplicable. Poe's impact on horror literature extends well beyond his own time. The narrative structures he established, the emphasis on psychological terror, and his use of suspense influenced the evolution of the genre throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. By breaking with the tradition of moralistic tales and predictable narratives, Poe introduced a new way of writing that blends the real with the fantastic, challenging the literary conventions of his era. This innovative approach was reflected in the work of countless later authors who, inspired by his style, went on to explore themes such as alienation, existentialism, and the inevitability of fate. Poe's influence can be seen at various moments in the history of literature, from modernism to postmodernity, underscoring the timelessness of his reflections on horror and the human condition. Melancholy is perhaps the most striking and universal trait in the work of Edgar Allan Poe. This profound sense of sadness, often associated with loss, solitude, and inevitable decline, is the foundation upon which the atmosphere of his narratives is built. In many of his works, melancholy emerges as a manifestation of nostalgia for a lost time, a youth that has faded, or loves that can never be revived. Poems such as Annabel Lee exemplify this sense of mourning and longing, where the loss of the beloved is depicted in a lyrical and almost mystical manner. This ability to transform the pain of loss into art is one of Poe's great legacies, demonstrating how melancholy can paradoxically be a source of inspiration and beauty. At the same time, this approach imparts an emotional depth to his work, allowing the reader to identify with the sense of loss and the inevitability of time. Another melancholic aspect that pervades Poe's writings is the sense of isolation and alienation. In tales such as The Telltale Heart and The Black Cat, characters often find themselves trapped in a cycle of guilt and paranoia, isolated from a society that does not understand the depth of their inner torments. This solitude, almost existential in nature, reveals a painful facet of the human experience, where the individual is confronted with their own demons and the impossibility of finding relief or understanding in the external world. In this context, alienation is not only physical but primarily psychological, representing a separation between the inner self and the surrounding reality. In many instances, melancholy in Poe does not present itself as an exclusively negative feeling. On the contrary, there is a tragic aesthetic in the way the author perceives destruction and decay. Ruin, death, and decline are transformed into symbols of a singular beauty that transcends mere horror to become a celebration of life's ephemerality. This ambiguous vision, where the tragic and the beautiful coexist, is one of the elements that make his work so rich and complex. Through this perspective, Poe invites the reader to discover, even in the shadows of death, a form of beauty that is both unique and profoundly human. The emotional depth and symbolic richness of Poe's work have been the subject of intense analysis in the fields of psychology and philosophy. Several scholars argue that his texts reflect the existential inquietudes of the 19th century, anticipating concepts that would only be fully explored in psychoanalysis and existential philosophy. The study of emotions and mental states, especially those associated with madness and depression, is present in several of Poe's works. By depicting tormented characters, the author explores the boundaries between reason and delirium, opening up space for a deeper understanding of the internal conflicts of human beings. This exploration of the human psyche has led to Poe's work being reinterpreted over the years by critics who linked it to the discoveries of modern psychology. An analysis of his short stories reveals, for example, how guilt and anxiety can transform into elements of a narrative that goes beyond a mere recounting of events, delving into the realm of introspection and existential analysis. From a philosophical standpoint, Poe addresses themes that allude to the fragility of existence and the sense of emptiness that overwhelms human beings in the face of the inevitability of death. The idea of the abyss, whether represented by a ruined house or a heart beating out of sync, serves as a metaphor for the human condition, marked by a constant struggle against oblivion and the quest for meaning in an indifferent universe. This existentialist vision, later deepened by 20th century philosophers such as Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, reveals the timeless nature of the concerns Poe captured in his writings. By bringing to light the dichotomy between the desire for eternity and the reality of finitude, the author transforms horror into a meditation on the very meaning of life. Contemporary critical analyses frequently highlight the relevance of the themes Poe addresses in understanding the modern human experience. In a world where technology and globalization seem to offer immediate solutions to loneliness and existential anguish, Poe's work resonates as a reminder of the complexity of human emotions. His insistence on portraying pain, loss, and despair is not confined to a specific era, but echoes in the works of writers who, even in modern times, continue to explore the dark recesses of the soul. In this way, the melancholy that pervades his texts becomes a link between the past and the present, keeping the relevance of his literary legacy alive. Over the years, the work of Edgar Allan Poe has been the subject of intense debates and academic studies. Literary critics, historians, and philosophers have found in his texts a wealth of meanings and a complexity that defies one-dimensional interpretations. Critical essays published from the 19th century to the present emphasize how Poe was responsible for reinventing the concept of horror in literature. His texts have been analyzed in light of the theories of Romanticism, symbolism, and even psychoanalysis, which point to the existence of an internal horror, as powerful as the grotesque images he mastered to create. This multifaceted approach has been continually re-examined in academic studies, which stress Poe's ability to transcend the merely sensational by establishing deep connections between terror and the human condition. The melancholic aspects of Poe's work are often interpreted as reflections of his troubled biography and the emotional upheavals that marked his life. Numerous essays explore how the loss of loved ones, emotional instability, and existential crises were transformed into literary elements that endow his writing with a rare universality. For many critics, melancholy is not merely a recurring theme, but the common thread that unites his works, allowing for an interpretation that transcends the literal to reach the symbolic and the metaphorical. In today's context, Poe's work continues to be studied in university courses and literary symposiums, often cited as a fundamental reference for understanding horror literature. The analysis of his narrative technique, the construction of suspense, and the use of melancholic imagery have inspired interdisciplinary research that engages fields such as psychology, philosophy, and even the social sciences. This recognition not only validates Poe's historical importance, but also reinforces the timelessness of his contributions to literature. Even 2 centuries after his death, Edgar Allan Poe remains a central figure in popular culture and literature. His legacy can be observed in various forms of artistic expression, from cinema and music to video games and digital culture. Poe's influence is notable in cinematic works that seek to explore horror and psychological suspense. Films that address Gothic terror and suspense often draw inspiration from the aesthetics and themes developed by Poe. Directors and screenwriters utilize elements such as dark settings, the use of visual symbols, and the construction of tormented characters to create narratives that engage with the author's legacy. This translation to the screen reinforces the idea that Poe's work transcends the page, influencing the way horror is represented in different media. In the digital age, Poe's work has found new audiences and fresh modes of interpretation. Streaming platforms, social networks, and virtual reader communities have contributed to the dissemination and revival of classic narratives, allowing new generations to discover the mysteries and tragic beauties of his tales and poems. This popularization has also sparked a new wave of criticism and analysis that re-examines his works from the perspective of the challenges and concerns of the contemporary world. Thus, Poe's legacy adapts and reinvents itself, demonstrating the vitality of his writing even in times of constant cultural transformation. The breadth of Poe's influence is not confined to classic horror. Authors of various genres, from science fiction to detective novels, recognize that the narrative elements developed by the author are fundamental to constructing stories that defy convention. The creation of the narrative detective, for example, was a direct legacy of Poe, whose work, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, inaugurated a new subgenre in literature. This ability to innovate and break stylistic barriers shows how his influence extends beyond the limits of horror, permeating the collective imagination and inspiring new forms of storytelling. Edgar Allan Poe remains to this day an undisputed icon of horror literature and a master in the art of transforming pain and melancholy into elements of an engaging and unsettling narrative. His work, marked by a unique combination of refined technique, deep symbolism, and a keen sensitivity to the internal conflicts of human beings, continues to challenge and inspire readers and literary critics. What is observed in Poe is his ability to transform personal tragedy and existential anguish into a literary language that transcends time and social conventions. By exploring themes such as psychological horror, the obsession with death, the duality of being, and the inherent beauty of destruction, he built a universe where the melancholic becomes synonymous with deep reflection on human nature. This perspective, which combines aesthetic sensitivity with an analysis of the darkest corners of the mind, secured for Poe a privileged place not only in the history of literature but also in global popular culture. Poe's contributions to the horror genre are invaluable. His legacy manifests itself in the way suspense is constructed, in the ability to evoke a dense atmosphere, and in the innovative use of narrative elements that explore the complexity of the human psyche. From the Gothic tales that inspired the early movements of modern horror to the perceptible influence on contemporary authors, his work remains a fundamental reference for any discussion about the nature of fear and anguish. The melancholy that pervades his texts, far from being a mere stylistic device, is what grants his narrative an emotional depth and a tragic realism that resonates with the universal experiences of humankind. Through his poems, tales, and essays, Poe invites the reader to confront the dilemmas of existence head-on, to acknowledge the inevitability of loss, and to find, even in the shadows of despair, a reflection of the singular beauty that resides in the impermanence of life. In summary, the analysis of Edgar Allan Poe's work reveals not only the genius of a writer who transformed horror into art, but also the universality of themes that continue to inspire and challenge the conventions of modern narrative. His legacy is therefore a constant invitation to reflect on the limits of existence, the nature of fear, and the capacity of literature to illuminate the darkest corners of the human soul. The relevance of Poe's work manifests itself in a surprising way in modern times. In a world where isolation and anxiety are recurring themes in social discussions, narratives that explore the fragility of the mind and the inevitability of loss find new resonance. Poe's work, with its critical perspective on the limitations of the human condition, serves as a mirror reflecting contemporary anxieties, allowing readers from different eras to identify with its dilemmas. Recent studies in fields such as neuroscience and modern psychology have sought to correlate the extreme emotions described by Poe with the brain's neurological responses to stress and loss. Although such investigations are still in their early stages, they suggest that the emotional impact of Poe's texts may have biological foundations, reinforcing the idea that horror and melancholy are universal human reactions. This interdisciplinary perspective further strengthens the importance of his legacy, demonstrating that even in the face of scientific and technological advancements, the emotions that drive humanity remain unchanged. The analysis of Edgar Allan Poe's work, based on essays and critical studies over the years, reveals a literary richness that transcends time and genres. His unmistakable style, marked by mastery of suspense, the skillful use of symbolism, and the exploration of the depths of the human psyche, has established him as one of the pillars of horror literature. The melancholy that permeates every line of his texts is not merely an aesthetic trait, but the manifestation of a worldview in which beauty and suffering are inextricably intertwined. Poe's influence on horror literature is deeply and enduringly felt. From the creation of modern horror stories to the inspiration for authors and filmmakers seeking to explore horror in a psychological and existential way, the legacy of the American author remains alive and relevant. In his works, death, decay, and solitude are transformed into symbols of a complex and multifaceted human condition, where the fear of the unknown merges with the inevitability of loss. By examining the critical reception and academic studies dedicated to Poe, it becomes evident that his work remains a fertile ground for reflection on the boundaries of narrative and the human condition. Analyses highlight a writing style that, while breaking with the literary conventions of his time, becomes a mirror for the existential dilemmas that afflict humanity. Therefore, by dissecting the dark and melancholic universe of Edgar Allan Poe, we find not just an author, but a visionary who managed to translate through literature the fears, passions, and uncertainties that dwell in the human heart. His legacy, which continues to inspire and challenge new generations, is a testament to the transformative power of art in addressing the deepest aspects of existence, merging horror and beauty into a timeless and universal narrative. Ultimately, Poe's work remains an invitation to reflection, a challenge to look within ourselves and recognize that even in the deepest darkness, there is a spark of beauty that illuminates the path to understanding our own condition. The legacy of Edgar Allan Poe is, therefore, a legacy of courage, sensitivity, and, above all, an unwavering pursuit of unraveling the mysteries of the human soul. Thank you very much for watching our video until the end. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Have a haunted night, everyone, and see you next time.